In this section, I'm going to look at the HTML title. Now, as I've said a number of times now, the HTML title is the single most important on-site SEO factor that there is. Now, when you construct a title, it's generally recognized that Google will only display the first 64 characters. So what you want to do when you're composing your title, amongst other things, is try and limit it to 64 characters, because that will be displayed. You can have a longer title, as we'll see, but do remember that the title is the first thing that people are going to see about your website when they look at the snippets, the 10 results you get when people search for things. So it's very, very important you get a title that looks good to visitors and also looks good and works well with Google. Now, as it says in the fourth bullet point there, Google will often display the exact title that you specify. However, it's important to realize that Google will use what's called relevancy rather than simply relying on the contents of your title. So in plain English, what that means is that you need to have a title that's specific to the contents of that particular page. So remember, when we're talking about titles, each single page on your website can have its own HTML title. Each page will be about something slightly different. And as I say, you want the HTML title on every page to closely reflect what's on that particular page. As you can see in the last bullet point there, if Google thinks that your title is not particularly relevant, then it'll make one up. And even if you do have a really good relevant title and everything's just right, then Google might still create its own title depending on what people search for. So it's important to realize that if you specify a title, it doesn't mean Google will automatically use that. It's just if you write a very good title that's relevant to that particular page, there's a much higher chance of Google using the title that you specify. It puts you in control. Now, if your title is too long or too short, then Google will use its relevancy algorithm to display a more relevant title. And again, you can use the Google Search Console. You need to sign up for that. And if Google thinks there's anything wrong with any of the titles on any of your pages, it'll tell you, it'll say this title's too long or too short, or other things that Google doesn't like about it. So do keep an eye on the Google Search Console. Now, if you're using programs such as WordPress, generally the WordPress program will automatically generate a title for you. In some cases it does, in some cases it doesn't. But as we'll see, what you want to do is use something called SEO Yoast if you're using WordPress, and that can control exactly what your title and description looks like. More on that later. Now, as you can see in the last bullet point there, sometimes you see absolutely disastrous titles. Now, as I say, bearing in mind the importance of the words in the HTML title, having a title that says something absolutely stupid like homepage, welcome, new page, title goes here, in some cases no title at all, is absolutely crazy. You might think I'm making this up, but go and check it out yourself. There are numerous examples of websites where the homepage, as I say, just says, the homepage title rather, just says homepage or, new page or welcome, something like that. Now, again, as I've mentioned repeatedly, you want to concentrate on promoting your product, your service, and your location, not necessarily the company name. Generally, if you've got a company name that's fairly unique, like in my case, Cheltenham Group, that's very easy for Google to find. But what I'm promoting would be things like SEO training or WordPress training or YouTube marketing, depending what it is. And that's where the title comes in. Those are the sort of phrases I would want to put into my titles onto different pages. The other thing is, don't waste your titles by having the company name at the start of each title. That's another common mistake, because there's only about 64, 65 characters that are displayed. So if you've got a long company name and you start your title off with the company name, that's a huge waste of real estate. Just think, you've got 64 characters. In my case, the company name is Cheltenham Group, so that would take up a significant portion of my title. So I might have my company name on, say, the contact page or something like that, or the about page, but on every other pages, people don't really care what my company is called. What they're doing is they're looking for my product, my service, my location. And always remember those three things. Now, matching the HTML title with content, it's very important that the words you use or the phrases you use in the HTML title also appear in the body text. So for instance, if my title on a particular page was something like SEO training seminars in Perth, then I'd want to use either that exact phrase or something very similar to it in the body text. If there isn't a match, then Google's much more likely to think, this title is not really appropriate for that page, and it'll make one up. The other thing you should remember is to have unique HTML titles for each page. So let's say you've got, 200 pages for sake of argument, then every single page should have a different title and also, as we'll say, a different description. When I tell people this, especially if they've got large websites, sometimes they moan a bit, until I remind them of the fact that because the HTML title is so important, if you do have 200-300 pages, then by having a different title for each page and making that title specifically relevant to the contents of that page, that means all of a sudden you've got 200-300 different opportunities for optimizing for different keyword phrases. So instead of thinking of it as a chore to customize your titles on every page, look at it as an opportunity, an SEO opportunity. That said, don't try and spam the titles with your keywords. You want a title that is a short little phrase in reasonably good English. What you don't want, in my case for instance, would be a title that said SEO training, SEO seminars, SEO tutorials, SEO blah blah blah. You kind of get the idea. You don't just want a spaghetti mix of words. You want a proper little phrase that reads good to the people reading it and also sounds good to Google. So as you can see in the bottom example there, let's say you're a plumbing service in Perth, you could start off your title by saying Perth Plumbing Service. So, straight off the bat it tells viewers and Google exactly what you're about, and then you could go on to say something like qualified plumbers available 24/7. So in a very short phrase there, a single line, people can see exactly what you're about, and also the fact that you're in Perth and you're available 24/7, which if their tap has just blown up in the middle of the night, is exactly what they want to see. So as I say, the title may be displayed within the search engine results, but only if it's a really good match to the contents. So as you can see in this example here, locally here in Perth, if I type in something like SEO Training Perth, if you look at the titles I've got in the results there, those are exactly taken from the titles that I specified in my HTML tags. Remember that the HTML titles go in the head area of the HTML code. So if you don't have a title, or the title is a bad title, particularly not relevant to the contents, then basically Google will just make one up. So, common bad titles are no title at all, maybe just the word untitled as the title, or title goes here, endless variations of the theme, or something that's completely not relevant. Or another variation is just having your company name, and that's it in the title. And if you have that for every single title on every single page, again, Google will not like that. Now, the click-through rate and SEO, the more enticing your title looks to human beings within the page of search results, the more likely they're going to click on it. So the better the title looks, the higher the click-through rate. Because do remember, the whole point of SEO is to ideally get you onto the first page results. Normally there's only 10 snippets, 10 results being displayed, and ideally you want to be as high as possible. The thing about SEO is most people just concentrate on trying to get onto the first page, and it doesn't seem to occur to them that what the snippet looks like is also important. So as I say, you want a really snappy, enticing title, with some sort of call to action ideally, that people are going to click on. You don't have to be the first one, you just have to be ideally towards the top of the page, if that's possible, and you want something that looks enticing. You want your snippet to look better than your competitors' snippets, maybe more relevant. Now, something else you should consider, bearing in mind I've said that Google will look at your title, then look at the contents of the page. The other thing it will do, it'll look at your title and then it'll look at your H1 heading, and providing the two are kind of on message, not identical, but on message, you don't want the titles and the HTML headings to be the same, you just want them to be similar. Now, keyword positioning within your title, we've already established the fact the title will only be about maybe 64 characters, 65 characters, something like that. That'll be displayed as sort of maximum length of a title within the snippet results. So bearing that in mind, what you want is to have your product or service right at the beginning of your title, because what happens is Google looks at the words at the beginning of the title And as it moves along towards the end of the title, the words or the value of those words become less important. So the really important words, they should go right at the start of your title. So again, in my case, the ideal title would be SEO Training Perth. So that's exactly what I do and where I do it. Later on in the title, I could have other things like the fact I do online training as well as physical training in Perth. Now, localization of your titles, obviously this depends on what kind of organization you represent, but if you're just a small company, local business looking for business in your sort of area, your suburb, your region, your state, or your country, then you want to try and get those words into your title. So for my physical training seminars where, I deliver training to a group of people, really I'm looking for customers in Perth. So it's very important in my case, I would have the word Perth, or maybe Perth Northern Suburbs or something like that in the title. Or maybe the words Australian or WA, short for Western Australia. These are the sort of things you should think about. Also, if you are going for business further afield, do bear in mind that different countries and different regions have different spellings. So, for instance, the word organize in America, it would be with a Z. In Europe or Australia, it would generally be with an S. So there's these different spellings you have to think about. Now, here's something that people don't realize. A lot of people, once they start doing serious SEO research, they realize that only about 64 characters of the title will be displayed. However, it's important to realize that Google may actually index more than 64 characters, in fact maybe up to 250 characters. What I mean by this is that if you have a long title, more than 64 characters, when you see that title displayed in the search results, it will get so far within that 250 characters, and then it'll be truncated. You just see the ... But Google are actually on record as saying they can take the information in a long title of up to about 250 characters and use that to determine what the page is about. So when it comes to the length of your titles, some people like nice clean titles that don't truncate, in which case they keep them to a maximum of 64 characters. I tend to use a mixture, so some of my titles will be limited to 64, so they're nice, clean, and don't truncate. Whereas other pages, I'll use maybe a much longer title, up to about 250 characters. Obviously, that won't be displayed in the snippet, but Google may actually examine the rest of the words within that long title and use it to determine what the page is about. So it's a bit of yin and yang there, depend what sort of visual look you want for your titles. So as it says in the last point there, if you do have a longer title, you could include sort of keyword variations and plurals and synonyms within the longer part of the title. It's not actually displayed, but which Google may well read. Now, titles and branding, as I've mentioned, what you don't want to do is to just bang away and have the company name right at the beginning of the title. What you want to concentrate on is not the company name, it's your product, your service, and your location. Now, if you determine that you have a number of words that are important, for your SEO, then in my case, I wouldn't want the word SEO, then a whole bunch of words, then the word training. I want to group those words together. So for me, the phrase SEO training is very important. So in the title, it just means I need to have those two words next to each other, SEO training, not SEO blah, 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 blah training. Simple point, but again, just something to bear in mind. So, if you do have a list of key words, try and organize them into a sentence that doesn't sound too artificial. And as I say, try and get the important keywords right at the beginning of your title, because as you move across along the title, the value of those words becomes less important to Google. So the order of your keyword phrases is also important. So again, if we stick with my example, I could have SEO training or I could have training SEO. Far more people would search for SEO training rather than the other way around. So again, if you have a list of single words, try and sort of get them into the order that people would actually use within a search phrase. Something else you want to try and consider is to essentially have two parts of your title. So have the first bit, boom, 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 sort of 3 or 4 words, and then maybe a separator, and then maybe repeat one of those words again. So in my case, I could have something like SEO training course, then a separator, and then something like courses run in Perth or something like that. So I've got the word course in there twice, once as a single version and once as a plural version. Again, very simple technique, but very powerful. Something else is use similar words in the title. So in the same way within the body text, again, taking my example, if I was talking about SEO training, so in my case, instead of just the word SEO training, I could have something else, like instead of the word training, I could have course or courses, seminar, seminars, tutorial, tutorials, and maybe things like workshop, something like that. So try and get as many different words within reason that kind of mean the same but are slightly different words. Don't overdo it. Ideally you should take this idea and spread it out across a couple of pages. What you don't want in the title is a phrase that says, literally something like SEO training, SEO courses, SEO seminars, SEO tutorials, because that sounds boring to me, and as sure as anything, Google will find it offensive as well, so it'll just look at it as an attempt to spam. So always remember, as I say, keep your titles sort of sounding natural, basically. Now, there are some stop words which Google will ignore. To some extent, you have to have these in your title, otherwise it just sounds like a list of keywords. So little words like and or and similar words like that, they're actually ignored within the search. That said, you have to use them sometimes, otherwise you just end up with a list of keywords and that looks like spam. So, just be careful. As far as separators are concerned, as I said, a good idea is to have maybe sort of 3 or 4 words right at the beginning of your title, then some sort of separator, and then a second part of the title using maybe a different form of those words, but kind of reinforcing the first part of the title, as it were. So in this case, I've just simply typed in SEO Sydney. We ignore the adverts at the top there, which are only there because they advertised. If you look here, we've got SEO Sydney, then what's called the piping symbol, and then the second half here. Then we've got a dash, and they've actually opted for a longer title, so you can see it's truncated. You've got the ... In this case, they've got a nice short title, so it's SEO Sydney dash, and then it's backing up here what we've said here. So in this case, you've got SEO, the abbreviation, Sydney, and here we've got the long version, Search Engine Optimization, and again they've repeated Sydney, and they've also snuck in the word consultants. So you'll see in a lot of these cases they're doing the sort of things that I've advised you to do. Have a short version and then the longer version. So here it's SEO, there it's Search Engine Optimization. These ones here, look, SEO, and then the longer version. And they've got the words in, so they're talking about the product, or the service, and the location. So SEO Sydney. Then they've just got SEO on its own, and then they've got Search Engine Optimization, Sydney. So you can see in a lot of these cases, what was the search I did? SEO Sydney. In a lot of these cases, the word Sydney appears in the title, yes? In fact, I think just about every case the word Sydney appears in the title. So that kind of re-emphasizes what I'm saying, in your title, you put your product, your service, and your location. So in this case, obviously, it's Sydney, and they're talking about SEO. Now, the other thing, if you've only got 64 characters, sometimes if you think about it, you can use a smaller version of a word. So for instance, let's say for some reason you wanted the word and in a title, you could use this symbol instead. And if you wanted the word copyright, you could use this symbol, or maybe you could use an abbreviation. So again, in my case, I could have Search Engine Optimization, or I could just type in SEO, which is like a much shorter version of the, the full version of the word. Now, using exact keyword matches, when you use either the Google Keyword Planner or a third-party research tool to see what sort of phrases people actually search for your product or service, then ideally you want to go and look at the volume searches that people use, the volume phrases that people use to search, and then try and replicate those exactly within your title. So what I mean by that is you do your research, you find that this particular phrase is used by, for sake of argument, 5,000, whereas another phrase is only used maybe 500 times a month. Then the phrase that appears 5,000 times a month, that's the phrase you want to try and sneak into your titles. Something else to consider is capitalization. What you don't want is a title in all caps. It kind of looks spammy, so stick to natural capitalization. Some words like the word OK, or indeed the word or the abbreviation SEO, those can be in caps, that's fine, but keep everything else, to natural capitalization. Start off the title with a capital letter, but everything else in lowercase. Something else to look out for is you don't want a title and a description, which we'll look at in the next section. You don't want the two of them to be exactly the same. You want them both to be on message and roughly about the same thing. As I've already mentioned numerous times now, the title is incredibly important for SEO. The description, on the other hand, doesn't actually affect your SEO as such. What it does do is affect your click-through rate. But that said, you don't want a title that says one thing, then description says something completely different. So, as we'll see, a lot of the rules that we've talked about for titles also appear for descriptions. But the other thing is, as it says in the second bullet point there, the description can be a lot longer than the title, and it's basically where you can put some extra information in there, maybe your phone number or your precise location, things like that, and what exactly makes you different from your competitors. Right, and finally, don't use a trademark name within your HTML title or indeed your description. So, for instance, if you were producing some sort of fizzy drink, you would not want to use the words, say, Coca-Cola or Pepsi in your title. I'm not sure about this, you need to take legal advice on it, but I believe there was a ruling in the United States many years ago where if you used a trademark description in your title, the lawyers could actually take action against you. So it's like all things to do with trademarks, respect other people's trademarks and don't abuse them. But again, you'd have to take proper advice from a lawyer on that.